The second Bible verse that Penn Jillette gave in his popular 6-minute video, How Did You Become an Atheist?, was Abraham being willing to kill his son. The fact is, not only was Abraham willing to kill his son Isaac, God actually instructed him to do so, saying, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." The Telegraph of London highlighted this verse as number 8 in its article, Top 10 Worst Bible Passages. In his 2009 debate with my colleague Kyle Butt, American atheist Dan Barker asked the audience, "Remember the thing about when Abraham, God, asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac? By the way, Abraham should have said, 'No way, I'm better than you. I'm not going to kill my son.'" Are Penn Jillette, Dan Barker, and other atheists right? Should this passage of Scripture logically lead people away from the Bible and the God of Abraham to atheism? Prior to a discussion of Genesis 22, one is compelled first to ask the atheist upon what basis he deems the killing of a child as wrong or evil. As some leading unbelievers have admitted, atheism logically implies everything is permitted, including murder. Do atheists not frequently justify the murder of unborn children? Renowned atheist Peter Singer indicated in 2000 that it would not even be wrong to kill a disabled child who had already been born. He wrote, "Killing a disabled infant is not morally equivalent to killing a person. Very often, it is not wrong at all." Thus, some of the world's leading atheists have justified murdering human beings, even when doing so means taking the only life that a child will have, according to naturalistic atheism, which implies that there is no eternal afterlife. So how exactly can atheists objectively, logically, and non-hypocritically condemn God and Abraham in Genesis 22? Even still, Genesis 22 poses no real problem. Why? Because God did not actually intend for Abraham to kill his son as a burnt offering. God's command was only a test, as we read in verse 1. God tested Abraham. When a mother asks her young son, whom she just watched from a distance make a mess, who did this, the question is not asked for informational purposes. She is testing her son to see if he will tell the truth and take responsibility for his actions. When a teacher gives her class what appears to be an impossible-to-pass closed-book test, the contents of which have never been covered in class, the students may initially think their teacher is being terribly unfair. However, the students later learn that the test was actually a test of their character. Who all would be honest and take their F versus who would be dishonest and cheat on the test in order to get an A. In the end, those who failed were actually given a 100 and those who passed were given a 0. At first, before all the facts were known, the teacher seemed quite unfair, but in the end, the students learned an important life lesson, while also discovering that their teacher was actually very just and wise. Scripture reveals that God has occasionally asked questions and made statements that were meant not in the normal ways, but as teaching moments or tests. In John 6, for example, Jesus asked Philip about the great multitude who followed him, saying, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But Jesus asked the question to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Would Philip and the apostles recall that Jesus miraculously had furnished more than 100 gallons of a tasty beverage at the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee in John chapter 2, and conclude that Jesus alone could just as easily, miraculously feed thousands of people on this occasion if he so desired? Or would the disciples worry themselves with the large number of people and the limited natural resources? Jesus knew they were not going to purchase food for the multitude, but he still asked the question because it was a test of their faith. He made it an enlightening, growing moment. So what does all this have to do with Abraham in Genesis chapter 22? Simply that God never actually wanted Abraham to literally sacrifice his son, any more than Jesus wanted his disciples to purchase bread to feed thousands of people in John chapter 6. Abraham's faith was tested, and he passed the test without ever killing Isaac. God knew from the beginning. He knew all along that this was a test, only a test. In fact, had Abraham actually killed Isaac, he would have disobeyed God, since at the moment when Abraham was about to slay his son, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him." Admittedly, God's test of Abraham was a deep and difficult experience for the patriarch. But keep in mind that God knew all along it was a test, and that the passing of the test did not actually include Abraham killing Isaac. Although Abraham didn't know that God was testing him, Abraham stood firmly upon the promises of God. The Lord had previously guaranteed him, saying, "Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. My covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you." The same God who tested Abraham's faithfulness in Genesis 22 is the same God who had promised him that Isaac would have many offspring. Thus, Abraham concluded that though he might kill his son at God's trying command, God would virtually immediately raise Isaac from the dead. Indeed, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, "In Isaac your seed shall be called," concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. Abraham never killed his son, and God never actually wanted him to, but he did test him, and Abraham passed the test in a faithful, commendable manner. Such complete trust is what the God of heaven, the God of the universe, wants from anyone and everyone who truly seeks after him.